Great. So why don't we go ahead and get started? First, let me begin by introducing myself. I'm Jamila Brown, the Communications Director here at SumOfUs. And from all of us, we really want to thank you for joining us today. As you know, our members mean so much to me and to the rest of the group. So we really just want to say thank you. This is an opportunity for us to talk to you about all of the amazing things that we've accomplished together as a community this year. And we have a very special guest, Dr. Elaine Leung, who's going to be here in conversation with our amazing Executive Director, Hannah Lownsbrough. Also, please say hello to my colleague, Tom Barnes, who is in London. He will be moderating the conversation today. So just so you all know, there are some control features that you'll see down in the menu. Feel free to adjust your audio. We've muted everyone else for the call just to do some quality control, but please pay attention to the Q&A button. There will be time for you to ask questions on the call, and we really do want to hear from you, so please put your responses there. Also in the chat, you can tell us about yourself. Give us your name, tell us where you're joining us in from today. We really do want to know who you are, where you're coming from, and why this matters to you so much. You can also be chatting each other during the call as well, so feel free to do that. The hand raise feature is used on this call, but we're really not going to be utilizing that as a mechanism. We really want you to pay attention to the Q&A and put your questions there. So please do that for us so we can make sure that your questions get through. So now it is my very distinct pleasure to introduce our Executive Director, Hannah Lownsbrough, to tell you about all of the amazing things we've done in 2018.
Thank you so much, Jamila. And I want to, first of all, echo what Jamila says, which is that these events really are such a pleasure, such a privilege to have a chance to meet with some of us members and also to hear from experts like Elaine about the work that they do and how that intersects with some of the campaigning that we are able to do. Before we get started talking to Elaine, what I'd like to do is just sort of set out really what 2018, what kind of a year 2018 has been for some of us and some of us members. It's really one of my most favourite things about being in this job is that really all of our work is only possible because of our members taking action. None of our work would be possible without them taking action. And whether that's signing a petition or emailing your pension fund or chipping in with a donation, really that's where our power comes from. There's, a particularly critical contribution which many folks on this call make, is that they contribute monthly, a regular gift to some of us monthly. Some of the people on this call have contributed larger amounts, and that really means that we can have a kind of constant presence and impact on challenging corporations to do better by the people that they say they're there to serve. The campaigning that we do is really very much informed and led by the issues that some of us members tell us that they care about. So sometimes we get suggestions for campaigns from members. We also have surveys where members share their ideas for campaigns with us. And it means that every SumOfUs member, whether you've signed one petition once or whether you take action with us 4 times a week, every single SumOfUs member is a campaigner. And that's a really amazing thing about the way that we work. We're not ever going to have as much money as the corporations that we're tackling. When I was talking to Tom about what I was going to say today earlier, I said, oh, we're probably never going to have as much money as the corporations we tackle. And Tom said to me, I mean, we're never going to have as much money. And of course, he's right. We are never going to have as much money as the corporations that we take on. But we really have a power that they will never have, which is people power. We have people who are willing to use their free time, their talent, their energy to join in and to try and push corporations to do better. And that's really where our strength comes from. It's also true that I think part of our strength and part of what builds our credibility is that when we win campaigns, we follow up. So we don't believe that corporations will always do exactly what they say they will do. We don't just take their word for it. Really, we push companies to meet their commitments, and we keep on pushing to make sure that we have as much impact as possible. So I want to just share with you a few examples from campaigns we've run in 2018. I mean, what I'd really like to do is tell you about all of them, but unfortunately we'd never get off the phone, and I suspect most people on this call have got very busy lives. So I want to share with you a few of my highlights from the year, and I think highlights for you know, some of us members and colleagues as well. And I think for me, one of the places that we've had some really exciting breakthroughs has been in our campaign to protect bees. So as folks on the call may very well know, there is deep concern about the global bee population because of the use of pesticides, particularly called neonicotinoids, that endanger bee populations. And some of us have been campaigning on this for years, along with partners in a variety of different organisations. In April, about 10,000 Some of Us members chipped in to pay for ads on political news sites to push the European Union decision makers to take action on neonics. And very soon after this, the EU banned 3 of the worst bee-killing pesticides that people have been particularly concerned about, scientists are particularly concerned about. We also saw similar success in Canada, right around the other side of the world, where tens of thousands of petition signers successfully pressurised the Canadian government to ban a couple of neonics as well, which is great news. Some of us members also went with beekeepers and other campaigners to hold Bayer, which is one of the companies that is doing some particularly controversial pushing for the use of neonicotinoids. We went to hold them account at their AGM, their kind of critical meeting that they have once a year. We protested outside. We actually staged a mock funeral for the last bee. And we took action inside the AGM too, with Some of Us campaigners on stage. They asked tough questions. And about 5,000 shareholders supported what's called a counter motion to make sure that we kind of held the board accountable on them taking a better position on neonicotinoids. I think one of the other things that I felt really engaged with campaigns-wise in 2018 is our work around water. So something that we're seeing increasingly is corporations hungry to profit from water. And for me, and I suspect for many others on this call, water is such a fundamental human need. It seems particularly sinister, really, and particularly worrying when corporations are kind of chipping away at, you know, affordable, reliable access to safe water. So we teamed up with a little community, a really tiny rural community actually in Australia called Stanley, and they had ended up saddled with 90,000 Aussie dollars worth of debt, which is a huge amount of money for a community of that size, because they did to take on Asahi Schweppes in court because the company was grabbing really the community's only water resource. It's less than 500 people, so this was an unimaginable amount of money for them to find. And Some of Us members managed to raise 45,000 Aussie dollars for that community, which cut their debt in half and really changed things for them. Similarly, in Michigan in the US, we've engaged with Nestle. So we both pressurized the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, calling on them to challenge Nestle through withdrawing permits because Nestle were trying to draw a huge amount of water from the Osceola township in Michigan, more than they could realistically cope with. There's been a very complicated legal process that remains ongoing. We raised about $50,000 for the township very late last year and at the beginning of this, but we've just heard that community is appealing the verdict which went against them, and just this weekend we've raised funds to called on members to raise funds to support them again. We're doing work on palm oil. Palm oil is production is a really key driver of deforestation. And we know that if there aren't major changes to the way that we get our hands on palm oil, then orangutan populations could be completely extinct within 10 years. And this year, Some of Us members pushed PepsiCo and Nestle and Citigroup to clear up their supply chain by ending their business relationships with a company called Indofood, which is a huge food giant that supplies palm oil to lots of household brands. About almost 250,000 Some of Us members, about 240,000, signed petitions to help win breakthrough sanctions from the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, which has really helped to move that issue in the right direction. We've also continued to campaign on glyphosate and Bayer. We filed to join a legal challenge at the European Court of Justice, and we're now waiting for that case to be heard. And we've also chipped in to support a man called Dwayne Johnson. A jury ruled that Monsanto's the pesticide Roundup had contributed to causing his terminal cancer. And actually only this morning I read the email of thanks that Dwayne sent to our team and to some of us members. We will be sharing that with some of us members very soon. And of course his situation is totally heartbreaking, but he was so moved by the contribution. We're one that, we think we're the only organisation that's actually come in to support him in that way. We've just transferred him $28,000 from the Some of Us community to support him through the next stage of what is really a pretty historic legal action. And then the final sort of cluster of campaigns that I've felt particularly excited about in 2018 are campaigns focusing on technology corporations. We've had a variety of different success stories there. I want to share two that have particularly focused on tackling the role that some online platforms have played in the rise of the far right online. So we worked with partners to have an impact on Nazi memorabilia that pretty horrifyingly was being sold on Amazon. We've seen Amazon has taken some of it down. They've been slower to act than we would like, but it seems like a small step in the right direction. And in November, following about 65,000 members taking action and thousands of people chipping in, we pushed PayPal to stop doing business with a guy called Tommy Robinson, who is a British man who is extremely racist and has been sort of stoking the fires of the far right here in the UK and beyond. He was actually just about to start an international far right sort of tour, particularly worryingly. And he himself says that he's lost 40% of his funding as a result of that, which I think he thinks is bad news, but I think we think is pretty great news, to be perfectly honest with you. So that's the sort of whistle-stop tour of some of the highlights of the last 12 months. I'm actually going to hand back to Jamila so that she can introduce us all to Elaine, and then hopefully I'll get to ask Elaine some questions, which I've been looking forward to.
Thanks, Hannah. As you can hear, you all have helped us accomplish some really major and incredible things this year. One of the things that you've really been passionate about and Dr. Elaine Leung is with us today to speak about this in detail. Not only is she a marine biologist who has worked across this world to protect our oceans, she's also the founder of Sea Smart. The students that she works with affectionately refer to her as Dr. E. But the great thing about Elaine as well is that she's a Some of Us member. And to have someone with this deep knowledge who is working with us so passionately to protect our oceans and our planets and hold corporations accountable is really our honor to have her here with us. So I will welcome Elaine and also pivot it back to Hannah as well so they can start the interview. Please ask us questions. So use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and take it away, Hannah.
So I want to echo Jamila's very warm welcome. I am delighted that you're able to join us here, so thank you so much. I think I'm right in saying it's pretty early in the morning where you are right now, is that right? Or something like that?
Oh, it's not too bad. It was about 9 in the morning in Vancouver, Canada. I usually get 5, so it's all good.
Excellent. It's already dark in London, I'm afraid. It gets dark very early here these days. So what I wanted to start off by doing is could you tell us a little bit about what led you to become a marine biologist and a campaigner?
I have one of those cheesy stories of ever since I was a little kid, all I wanted to do was make the world a better place. And I actually had no idea what that meant. And basically, serendipity struck, and when I was 20, I got a job studying sea lions for the University of British Columbia. So I fell in love with marine biology and never looked back. You can imagine through my work, I get to travel the world working in really remote places studying endangered marine animals and recognizing just how threatened our oceans are and how vulnerable they are. and how together we all need to take action to help, because we all rely on our oceans to survive, regardless of how far we actually live from the oceans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I knew quite a few people when I was little who were very keen to become marine biologists, but you're the first person that I met who wanted to be a marine biologist who managed to end up being one. So that's pretty impressive. Can you tell us a little bit about the action that you've taken as a SumOfUs member?
So I've actually been a monthly donor to SumOfUs for years. And you can imagine, being someone who works in the conservation field, who has also worked with NGOs, I'm quite picky about who I support. And SumOfUs, I've always been a big fan of, because I always tell my students how important individual action is, but together we can do so much more. And that's really SumOfUs' power, is collecting, all the collective power of your individual supporters in creating big change. So in addition to being a monthly donor, I was invited to help support your campaign with McDonald's back in the spring. And basically, SumOfUs is trying to convince McDonald's to stop serving plastic straws worldwide. You can imagine it's tricky to make a business case for that for McDonald's. And I had the interesting experience of being flown down to the McDonald's AGM to speak to all the stakeholders and the board. And our petition got almost 500,000 signatures, and we were featured on national news and also international news. And all that pressure from all the SumOfUs members was what got McDonald's to agree ultimately to ban plastic straws across the UK and Scotland, and to investigate alternatives to plastic straw use in other countries around the world. So it's a hugely successful campaign. Hugely exciting, and just such a great moment to be able to bring together your expertise and your commitment with our members' sort of energy. And it was just a real it was a good SumOfUs moment. And thank you, of course, for being a monthly donor. I'm sure that my colleagues have already said that already, but let me add my thanks. When it comes to kind of challenging plastics pollution, what would you say are the kind of key challenges and the opportunities for 2019? I think one of the main challenges is how prevalent and pervasive plastic is throughout our entire lives, but also how quickly that happened. When you think maybe 20 years ago, did everything you encounter, was it wrapped in single-use plastics? Because not only is there lots of single-use plastics in our lives, but there's also lots of packaging for all these single-use plastics and for other items. And it's gotten to the point where it's happened almost so quickly that people don't realize it. So an activity that I challenge all of you to do is take out a piece of paper and draw yourself in the middle, and just think from the point when you get out of bed in the morning to, you going to the shower, brushing your teeth, eating breakfast. Just think about all the plastic you use during that point. Just draw it all down. And you'll see how, before you even leave your house in the morning, how much single-use plastics you've already gone through. And doing an activity like this is really helpful, because it emphasizes also, hey, where can I use reusable alternatives instead? Instead of using even using shampoo in a plastic bottle, can I use unpackaged solid shampoo bars instead? Something simple like that.
Sorry, I was stuck on mute for a moment there. And what do you think of that? So we've got those kind of key opportunities for us to take action as individuals. Do you think there are some things that we could do to kind of, that thing that you were talking about us as a kind of collective, SumOfUs members as a collective taking action? Like, are there particular opportunities that you think, we could really sort of dive in and make a difference in that way? I'm worried I might be putting you on the spot here, so it's fine if your answer is, I'm not sure, but I just thought I'd ask while we have the chance.
I would say the timing is pretty perfect right now to really raise awareness on the damage of plastic, and also convincing corporations, governments, as well as communities to take action. The oceans are a really hot topic, and plastic pollution especially is a really hot topic. It seems like every month we're hearing stories about animals that are washing up dead because their stomachs are completely full of plastic. We're seeing all these scientific articles coming out showing that not only is there small pieces of plastic in our seafood, but it's also in our tap water and bottled water in the air we breathe. There's tiny pieces of plastic everywhere we're looking, everywhere we're breathing, everywhere we're drinking. So it's really emphasizing that we need to take action on this. And especially with corporations, there's so many different businesses now announcing all these bans of different single-use plastics. And they always tell me that it's because of consumer demand, not because they actually want to do it, because it's better for the environment.
And I suspect that you've kind of been to some of the places where, you know, we're seeing these kind of really, really horrifying sort of signs of the damage that plastics are doing in our oceans. Like, can you tell us a little bit about your experience of the damage that you've seen in some of the countries that you visited or the places you visited?
So keep in mind, as a marine biologist, I have traveled the world working in some of the most remote places in the world. No one's allowed out here except for scientists. It can take days to get there by boat. And yet these beaches will be completely covered in plastic. I've watched sea lions suffocating because their necks are completely wrapped in fishing nets. I've watched albatross chicks being fed plastic by their parents, and then watching these chicks die slow, painful deaths because their stomachs are completely full of plastic. This should not be happening. I am seeing things that no one should ever have to see. And that's why I'm working so hard to stop all this. So kind of my background is I've been working as a marine biologist for over 15 years, working in remote places like Antarctica, northwestern Hawaiian Islands, Alaska, all over BC, studying different marine, mainly threatened marine animals for different governments, universities, and NGOs. And when I finished my PhD, I realized that over 30 of the species that I've studied or interacted with will go extinct within my lifetime. So you can imagine that's a horrifying statistic that no one should have to live with within their lifetime. And it helped me realize that none of the work I was doing was resulting in conservation action, or at least it wasn't happening fast enough. At the same time, I realized that there is a good news within all this, that each and every one of us can do something to help. And I believe so strongly in the power of individual action to create positive change that I started a nonprofit called Sea Smart. And our mission is to inspire and empower kids to love and protect our oceans. So we get kids really excited about our oceans to help them foster that connection, curiosity, and love with nature, because you only protect what you love. And it's also, again, believing so powerfully in the power of individual action that I support organizations like SumOfUs.
Yeah, and I mean, you must, I imagine, through those experiences, had some really magical moments of sort of seeing children kind of connect with oceans and connect with their environment. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those examples that have really stuck with you?
The impact we've had with Sea Smart exceeds my wildest dreams. Parents are always telling us how we've enriched their whole family's lives, not just our students. And our students are changing how things are being done at home. Our students won't let their parents use plastic at home anymore. They're getting them to, choose only ocean-friendly cleaning products. And they're getting the whole family spend more time at the beach. So it's amazing, these students, we teach kids from kindergarten up to grade 12, and they're all getting so excited about, they recognize the power they have to create positive differences, and they're making full use of that power. We even had one student, for her 6th birthday, instead of presents, she asked everyone to give donations to whale conservation. So if a 6-year-old can do this for our planet, think how much you can do.
Absolutely, she sounds like somebody that should definitely maybe she should be working for one of us at some point in the future. She might be a bit little now. Sounds like a good person to have on board. So tell me, I've got a question actually here from a SumOfUs member. So they were emailed in also from Canada, actually, from someone called Brenda in Ontario. Thank you, Brenda. I think she may be on the call. Brenda would like to know, firstly, can and should single-use plastics like bottles and bags be banned globally? And what would need to happen to achieve this? What are your thoughts on that? So it's a big question, but give us your ideas.
There's no simple answer, and there's different situations. I've worked in some of the most impoverished nations where there have absolutely no clean drinking water sources. So for them, bottled water is the only option. But also, of course, people in developing nations, they tend to not have infrastructure for waste management, let alone recycling, which means that in these places where people tend to have no option but to use single-use plastics, end up throwing all these things on the ground in the lakes, in the rivers and streams, and everything's connected to the ocean. So eventually everything ends up in the oceans. So basically what I believe is important is recognizing that, yes, there is a time and place for single-use plastics, for instance, for medical reasons. But if you don't need to use single-use plastics, use reusable alternatives, and pushing the governments, and particularly in the first world nations, to enact all these single-use plastic bans, but also getting the government to recognize that it's important to fund initiatives within these developing nations to help figure out what are some solutions to the single-use plastic problem.
Excellent, thank you. That's some helpful thoughts in there. Brenda actually had two questions, and her second question was, what do you think about current ocean cleanup operations, and how can we push for more and better cleanup?
So a lot of you probably heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is essentially a garbage island that's bigger than all of Europe, consisting of plastic. And this is just what we could see at surface. Most plastic actually sinks. So you can imagine how much bigger the plastic island actually is than what we've been able to see so far. So I think it's important to definitely clean up the oceans. It's even more important to stop these plastics from entering our oceans. So there's all this research that shows that the majority of plastic entering our oceans comes from rivers, about a dozen rivers in Asia and India. And that's where a lot of scientists are calling for more efforts to really prevent the plastics from entering the oceans and concentrating cleanup efforts there. There's also the problem that most countries don't fund beach cleanup efforts or ocean cleanup efforts. A lot of these are done by environmental nonprofits, which we need to change. The government should be responsible for this. It shouldn't rely on everyday people like you and me to be using our precious resources to clean up our oceans. I'm not saying that individuals don't have a role to play in this. I also participate in monthly beach cleanups with Surfrider Foundation, but we need more government support for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And which are sadly the questions to this maybe nobody, but who are the sort of the shining examples in this? Which are the countries or even the corporations that you're aware of that are kind of doing the right thing when it comes to plastics, or are a bit closer to doing the right thing when it comes to plastics, compared to your sort of, McDonald's plastic straws sort of who really started out at the other end of the scale?
So the zero waste movement is huge in Canada as well as in Europe. So there's lots of examples. In Vancouver alone, there's a package-free grocery store called Nada, and it was actually started up by a marine biologist who recognized that a lot of the problems our oceans are facing are related to our food systems. So not only is the entire store packaging free, but she works throughout the whole supply chain to reduce packaging throughout. We also have a similar store called the Soap Dispensary. And we're really lucky to live in a place where there is mindfulness about how valuable the zero waste living can be. I do want to really emphasize to people that we are seeing lots of bioplastics coming out and compostable plastics. And I really want to say to people, if you want to make a difference in the plastic pollution problem, don't think that using biodegradable straws or biodegradable cups is going to help the situation. If it's mainly greenwashing and adding to the problem. And the main reason for that is most bioplastics can't actually be composted in regular composting facilities. They need to be in the industrial composting facilities at really high temperatures for much longer than food waste products, which means most industrial facilities won't actually allow these bioplastics in their bins. So if they see them, they'll pick them out. And if there's too high a contamination load, as in there's too much of these bioplastics within the compost load, they'll throw the whole thing into the landfill. So this huge movement towards using bioplastics instead of single-use traditional plastics was actually resulting in a lot of compost as well as recycling being thrown in the landfill instead. And think about it, you're still using all these valuable food resources to produce something that you only use once and then you throw away.
Yeah. I think, that makes a great deal of sense. I think there are also examples of governments like in Bangladesh and in Kenya, for example, where we're seeing things like plastic bag bans coming in. And I think that for me is one of the really striking things about plastic. Good ideas about tackling use of plastic are, coming in from all over the world. And actually, it's really important that we kind of keep our ears open for, from learning from examples all over the place about the best ways of tackling these problems. So yeah, that's really interesting. I think that we now have I think I'm going to hand back to Jamila for a moment to do some questions. But before I do, I just want to say what an absolute pleasure it has been to have you with us today. Elaine, I know I've learnt lots, and I suspect that others on the call will feel the same. And I'm sure your time is extremely precious. So I'm very grateful, really, for you making the time to be with us today. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It's been an honor and privilege to be involved, and happy to support anytime.
Thank you so much. Jamila, back to you.
Yeah, what a great discussion. I am also a person who wanted to be a marine biologist and spectacularly failed. So this has been a treat for me, most definitely. We have so many questions that are great. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of your plastics questions. I think Elaine did a fabulous job of really incorporating so many of them. So we're going to pivot a little bit because our work is very big and vast. So we're going to start off with a question from Joe Bennett. And I believe I saw Joe is from Berlin. So which issue are you most excited about tackling in terms of the impact you believe some of us could have? And I'm going to say this one is for Hannah.
It is, I think. Well, I suppose it could be for any of us, actually, but I'll have a go. Which issue do I think we can have the most impact on? So I'm going to cheat and give two answers, actually. I do feel that the time is ripe for us to have a completely different approach to how we think about plastics, actually, in the world generally. I think that the understanding of that as a problem and the impact that has on our environment, I think is really quite something. I think we've sort of seen this huge shift that we haven't seen before. So I think the scope for that, because I think that, often your most exciting campaign moments are when kind of people power comes together with governments understanding something's a problem, with things being big in the media. And I think we're having that moment with plastics right now. So that's one of them. The other is kind of looking at the role that technology corporations play in the world. And I think that's a bit of a different one. I think we're still kind of getting to grips with the impact that they have. So I think that for folks in the, all different countries in the world where we're seeing a sort of a resurgence of the far right and of a particular kind of populist politics, I think there are many ways in which the changing technologies and platforms like Facebook and Google and so on have contributed to some of that political shift. And I think it's essential that as governments are kind of running to keep up with these corporations, that people power kind of plays its part in challenging these corporations to treat people decently with respect, and not to shy away from taking on tricky questions like, who should you allow to fundraise on your platform, for example. And I think that some of us is very well placed to play a leading role in some of those conversations. And so I'm pretty excited about that as well, sort of making sure technology strengthens rather than weakens our democracy and our societies.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hannah. We have some other questions. So Andrew asks, could and should some of us coordinate with other major campaigning organizations around the world to prioritize and devote a portion of resources to jointly prioritize and tackle key root causes of our current problems, rather than separately firefighting the myriad of different social and environmental symptoms?
That's a great question. I think you said Andrew, is that right?
That's right.
So, I mean, I think the honest answer is that we do work in collaboration with a large number of organisations. So our partners range from really big, pretty famous NGOs like Greenpeace or Rainforest Action Network, through to groups that are working very much at a community level. So like the Stanley, the community in Australia that we were talking about, we were engaging with a kind of grassroots community effort there. And I think that the truth is sort of a little bit like a sports team. I think that what you need to create social change is not just is not one kind of excellent player, but actually like a myriad of people with slightly different strengths. So there are some organizations that are brilliant at doing research. There are some organizations that can mobilize people really effectively in one country or one language, but might struggle to do that in other parts of the world. There are some organizations that aim to mobilize internationally, as we do. Some are fantastic at generating media coverage. And I think that the way in which we team up and bring those different strengths, that is something that we continue to do at Some of Us, and look for partnerships where we can kind of really build power together, rather than kind of being doing work that another organization could do the same or even better than we could.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Hannah. I'm going to go back to some questions we have here around, should we be concerned about fracking in the UK and abroad? The EPA's plans to allow fracking waste to be dumped in the Gulf of Mexico, for example. So it's definitely a growing concern of our members. Pamela Cassidy asked that question.
Thank you, Pamela. Yes, I think fracking is a really serious concern. We've joined with groups, certainly in the UK, I know, that have been challenging government plans for fracking. I think there are specific localized concerns around fracking to do with, creating land instability, impacts on water supplies. We also see the dumping that you described there in the Gulf of Mexico, but, that's also happening in other places. And also, perhaps most concerning of all, it's, this is not a renewable source of energy that we're talking about here. And really, if we want to tackle dangerous climate change, we need to be looking for renewable energy sources. So I think it's a case of governments and big corporations, planning, seeing a short-term opportunity and sacrificing our long-term well-being for it. And that makes it ripe for us to take action on.
Yeah, so we have more amazing questions. So this is another one. Notwithstanding all of the current injustices and risk facing our most marginalized communities, global priorities of climate change and corporate social responsibility, although not immediately self-evident as a priority, is Some of Us concerned and considering campaigning for regulation towards the development of artificial intelligence?
So we have looked at, one of the issues that we have campaigned on is looking at the way in which Uber, folks may remember this, the way in which Uber is changing the relationship between employer and employee. They would say their drivers weren't employees. We would differ on that. And I think in that situation, that's a good example of us trying to get involved with the sort of issue before artificial intelligence becomes the issue, because obviously the next thing is going to be that Uber is wanting to switch over from using drivers to having driverless cars, and that will obviously result in huge job losses and a bunch of ensuing highly undesirable kind of social knock-on effects. I think it is tremendously important that civil society, including organisations like Some of Us, engage with artificial intelligence. I think what that looks like is still taking shape, but certainly I would say even in the last 6 months, I've been in 2 or 3 kind of really exciting meetings of groups of organisations who are engaged on these issues and who are really keen to try and figure out what it is how we can make a kind of responsible, constructive contribution to making sure that AI is something good and not something that ends up being pretty bad for lots of us.
So we have some more hard-hitting questions about the future of our campaigns. This one comes from William Jacoby, and his question is about defense contractors and the fact that Some of Us has not done quite a lot of campaigns around them. So his question is, can we afford to leave them alone just because they control the media? Doesn't that make them more of a threat to us and the planet?
So this is actually an area of work where I would really like for some of us to be kind of building our kind of capacity to mobilize. I think I certainly don't think we think leaving them alone is a good idea. I certainly don't think that we have a kind of a very warm picture of defence contractors, and I think we are looking at examples of kind of irresponsible. So we've looked at some examples of kind of some fairly irresponsible arms deals around Yemen, for example, and some of those specific cases. But I think that will be an area of work that I would really like us to grow over the next couple of years. But we kind of need to build up a few muscles in tackling those corporations. Incidentally, William, if you have thoughts or ideas or suggestions of areas where we could be focusing on and building that area of work, I know that I would certainly love to hear about them. So that would be great.
Great. We have another question here from Reba Rubenstein, and I hope I pronounced that properly. Could be Reba. So can we address fossil fuel usage in China and India and the US?
So I think we can certainly be part of efforts to address fossil fuel usage in those places. And I think that, you correctly identify, the US and China and India as major players in that space. I also think that European Union countries have a fair share of responsibility there too. I think that we've been involved with a variety of different interventions. So we've done some stuff in support of divestment campaigns recently. We have run a number of campaigns kind of challenging the regulation of and the use of fossil fuels in a variety of different places. And we also did a piece of work looking at something that many corporations do as a sort of greenwashing strategy, is sort of take their emissions and sort of put them in China. So move them to a place where the regulatory situation is different. And what that does is sort of spare their blushes in the countries where they're going to be held to account potentially by government or what have you, and actually make that problem significantly worse for a country like China that is, also taking action. There is, some of the biggest leaps forward in terms of solar, for example, have come out of Chinese industry in particular. So I think it's a complicated picture. It's a much more globalized picture. And I think we have to focus, I think for some of us, the key contribution is to focus on the key corporations that are doing these things rather than focusing on tackling tackling national governments. I think that work is often best done domestically. We really primarily focus on tackling corporations who often take advantages of different regimes across different borders to kind of get the best deal for themselves and their shareholders, and not really worry too much about the impact that it might have on an ordinary person living in Beijing or in Philadelphia or any of the other places that are impacted by some of these things.
Great, thanks, Hannah. So we have two more questions. The second to last question is a great one about our shareholder work. So this person, who is anonymous, would like to know a little bit more about our shareholder work and if we're going to be continuing it in 2019.
Yes, actually, shareholder was on that. When somebody was saying what's he most excited about working on, I was a bit worried about just rattling on for 20 minutes. And so I had to limit myself to only two, and they'd only asked for one. So I'd already sort of overstepped my mark. But shareholder is one of the things that I'm most excited. I'm most excited about because I think we are one of the only organisations that combines using digital tools with a kind of shareholder program. We're not the only one, but I think we're one of the only ones. And so we certainly plan to continue it in 2019. Had a moment of forgetting what year we were in there, but I've got it back. I think we plan to focus significantly on some technology corporations, some kind of big agribusiness players, so sort of pesticides producers, etc., and also probably focusing on sort of mining or similar kind of extractive type industries. I think that's where a lot of our energy will go, and I think it's tremendously impactful. I think that corporations are still not that used to having big numbers of activists show up. It's a bit of a, historically, it's been a bit of a small interest, a small crowd doing that work. And one of the things Some of Us is able to do is kind of bring a big crowd of people along with us to get excited about a campaign. And I think when we do that, and we do that around shareholder, it's a bit of a shock to corporations. And often that means that they are willing to think differently about something that they've been really dragging their feet on up to that point.
Great, thanks, Anna. I am going to reference one person who's asked two questions, George Cocker. We see you, George, in Switzerland. And George asked about civil disobedience, and we definitely do a mix of digital and in-person actions. So that is a big part of how we build power at Some of Us. Pivoting into the kind of bigger vision of our work and kind of what we want to do in terms of changing the global economy for the better, Hannah, we have a question from Philip Reitman about consumerism. And what are we doing in terms of our campaign work to address and specifically target consumerism? And how do we really change the culture in terms of how we think about what we consume, how we consume, and how much we're consuming?
Okay, so taking civil disobedience first, I'm sort of guessing that that question might be, is that something we would ever be prepared to do? Is that something that we sort of agree with? The answer is, it's not something we've really done up to now. It is something that I think under the right circumstances, if we were confident that we could give Some of Us members the best advice, and if we were the right organisation to do it, then I think it's definitely something we would consider. We certainly partner with organisations like Greenpeace, for whom civil disobedience is a really big part of what they do. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop answer on that. When it comes to changing consumerism, well, I don't think we're going to do it on our own. I think that one of the things that Some of Us can do, and that Some of Us members already do and do a great job of actually, is kind of really shining a bit of a light on the way in which corporations, we're just so used to corporations being around, right? They're a bit like the weather. We sort of almost can't imagine life without them. And when we take on campaigns and win against some of these big corporations, it's not just about that one victory that we're having. It's about the fact that each time we win against the corporations, we're reminding ourselves and other people that they don't have, you know, they don't have to behave in the way that they behave. They're actually tools. They were tools that human beings created to do things that human beings wanted them to do. And it should be, that should be the relationship between corporations and ordinary people living their lives, not a relationship of corporations being big, huge, sort of, you know, big, huge monolithic things that we can't challenge. And so for me, I think it's by taking on and winning campaigns against some of these big corporations, we really tackle the sort of belief that gives rise to a kind of consumerist way of running the world.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah. That concludes our Q&A. And our last question really started to kind of touch on what we have to look forward to in 2019. So if you could just talk to us more about Some of Us's plans for the future and how members can continue to be engaged and involved.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's, you know, it's a bit of a mixed picture, isn't it? I mean, we started off this call talking about the fact that we've achieved some really amazing things together this year, but there's no escaping the fact that we've got some huge challenges on the horizon. You know, people on this call have talked about, you know, challenges ranging from, you know, artificial intelligence, what's going to happen to our jobs if you know, robots can do them instead of us, through to climate, which remains a really serious threat. You know, I and others on the call have already talked a little bit about, you know, how some of the really worrying patterns we're seeing with the far right starting to emerge as a serious political player, far more so than perhaps even 5 years ago. We're seeing people like Trump and Bolsonaro in Brazil and Orbán, and that, you know, creates a climate that's really threatening for lots and lots of people. And we've also actually got a kind of global deadline coming up in 2020 for kind of cleaning up dirty palm oil. So, you know, these problems of sourcing palm oil are starting to be really very urgent. And that deadline, you know, that deadline coming in 2020 means that this is sort of a critical point for reversing some of the deforestation and protecting orangutans and, you know, and the people whose human rights are put in danger and whose land rights are put in danger by that kind of agribusiness. So it's certainly true that we've got some really big challenges on the horizon. It's also true, of course, that, you know, that none of our work is possible without your support. And I think when we work together, we've seen in 2018, we have seen since some of us came into being, that when we work together, we can look to a world that is free from plastic pollution, where our bees and orangutans are safe from extinction, and really where corporations are actually working to make our lives better rather than potentially threatening our safety or undermining our well-being. And we believe that some of us can play a big role, and some of us members can play a big role in helping to make that change come to pass. We've got some specific plans for 2019 that we think will be helpful. So we want to start campaigning in Spanish. There are millions and millions of people who could be some of us campaigners who speak Spanish all over the world. But so far we haven't managed to run campaigns in Spanish, and that means we're missing out on those people's talent and energy and all of those things. We hope that with enough support from some of us members, we will make some of us even more international than we already are by increasing the languages that we use from just English, French, and German to include Spanish too. We want to invest in the best technology to kind of stay in front of corporate targets. So being clever about using things like WhatsApp or what have you to kind of run campaigns in new and different ways. We want to make sure that we're running shareholder campaigns, as I said already, in more countries if we possibly can. We know big corporations, as I say, don't like it when we challenge them using shareholders. And so we really believe this is a way that we can win more campaigns if we're able to kind of turn up the volume on that work. We want to deepen our links with grassroots groups like the group in Stanley and various other places so that we can really be right at the heart of some of these challenges where some of those fights are happening. And we're also looking to invest in more legal work actually to push for the ban on glyphosate in Europe and the US, with a view to making sure that those bans eventually, ultimately, we get global bans. So we're really pushing hard at the moment to fundraise enough to do even more next year in the face of all these challenges. We believe that many of the plans that I've just outlaid could, you know, it's regular gifts that really make the big difference, because regular gifts allow us to plan. So we're desperately hoping that we'll be able to get up to 2,000 monthly donors on board. And all that really remains to say is, obviously, we will continue to be in touch with this group of people and with some of us members more generally, hearing from us by email about everything that we've got planned for next year. And obviously, you know, I hope it goes without saying at this point, but we so appreciate the support of folks on this call. You know, the time and energy that you put into showing up to conversations like this, the petitions that you send, engaging with pension funds or what have you to challenge to challenge investment funds to do the right thing, and also obviously chipping in and donating to support our work to allow us to keep on making change. So all that really remains for me to say is huge thank you for being here today, but also for all that you've done over 2018.
Yes, and thank you so much, Hannah. I want to echo that sentiment. Thank you to Elaine, Dr. E. Thank you to Tom, who's done a great job moderating this call. And more importantly, thank you to all of you participants. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for being here.